Today I'm going to do another video about my home network, because it's been 2 years since I moved this to a fully UniFi environment. If you haven't seen that video, I'll put up a little card, but 2 years ago I took out a bunch of network equipment and changed it all to move from where I used to have a VIOS router and then UniFi switching and access point to this network now where I have a UniFi router, UniFi CloudKey, UniFi cameras, and basically all the networking equipment I use now is UniFi. Then even way before the previous system with UniFi switches, I was using an HP switch and then VIOS router and all that sort of stuff. So I moved everything to UniFi and set it all up. And I've been very happy with it because it's given me this fully, unified environment that lets me manage everything centrally. But now it's been 2 years, I've got a bit more experience with it. I found some things I like, I found some things I don't like. I found a few problems, there's been a few software updates, so I thought I'd come back and just go through each of the bits of hardware I've got and kind of just talk about it and talk about how I found it. Now this won't be the most exciting networking video I've ever done, but the reason I'm doing this now is because I'm about to make a slight change to the network. There's a slight spoiler there. If you can correctly guess what I'm doing, you win absolutely nothing because it's not a competition, but yeah, I'm going to be making a change to the network. So I thought before I make that video, which will come out in a couple of weeks, so subscribe if you want to see that, I would do this video just talking about my impressions with UniFi stuff before I get more. So what we'll do now is we'll go in closer, we'll take a look at each of the bits of hardware I've got in turn, and let's have a quick talk about it. So first up we have the UniFi NanoHD access point, and this has been really, really good. When I first moved in here I had a UniFi AP Pro, which was the dual band but just wireless N access point, and it was great. But then I moved over to this, and this is even better. This is a proper 4x4 multi-user MIMO access point, 802.11 AC, so it's not Wi-Fi 6 just because it kind of predates that, but it works fantastically. I don't have any devices that can fully use the 4x4 MIMO just because it's not that common, it's more for having lots of clients connected simultaneously. But things like my laptop, that's got 3x3 MIMO, so it does get decent benefit out of this. And yeah, I can't really fault it at all. I've also recently got an Oculus Quest 2 VR system, and I use Virtual Desktop to stream games from my desktop over that. And I'm doing that over Wi-Fi, and I thought, oh god, it's going to be a nightmare because trying to stream a game in VR in real time over Wi-Fi is going to be slow. But this has perfectly held up to that, and I've not had any problems at all, so I'm definitely very happy with it. I think the only issue I've had that's not remotely related to UniFi at all is that when I first when I first installed everything, I put the old access point in here first, and then I later put downlights in the hall, and I centered the downlight between the smoke alarm and the access point. But then since I did that, I then moved from the UAP Pro to the NanoHD, and then I replaced the smoke alarm. So because they're now both different sizes, mounted slightly differently, the light's off center, which is really bugging me. But the way they're mounted, there's like obviously the holes, the cables come through for both of them, and where the holes are don't line up to what they used to do. So that's, yeah, it's not a problem at all. This has nothing to do with UniFi at all. But yeah, I think if you're putting downlights in between like two things that are really close together, maybe be careful in case you ever change them in the future, because otherwise it now looks stupid that they're off center and it looks like I just can't measure. But yeah, the NanoHD has been really good. And also, it's quite a small device. I've recently, since putting this in, I've played with a AC Pro, and it's much larger, so the NanoHD does look a lot neater up there. And yeah, no stability issues, it's never gone down or crashed at all, and I get a perfectly good wireless signal throughout the entire flat because it's not that big, so I don't need multiple APs. This one does the job fine on its own. So for the next bit of equipment, we have the UniFi switches. Now, these are the oldest bit of UniFi kit I've had because I had these from before I did the main upgrade. I put these in when I first moved in here, so these have been here since the start. And these are the first generation UniFi Switch 24, so the US 24 I think. They're non-PoE, they're just standard 24 port switches, and they've been pretty good. I've got this one here and I've got another one in the office. The one in the office used to be in the living room, but then in a previous video I moved the rack through to the office, so it's now in the office. And I really can't fault them. Now, in hindsight, if I was moving to new switches and upgrading these, I would get PoE ones. When I first moved in here, I didn't have any of the cameras or any other PoE devices. I just had the access point. So I bought these switches because they were cheaper, and then just used an external PoE injector. When I then got the cameras and the CloudKey, and now I've got a Raspberry Pi that's PoE powered as well, I didn't want to buy new switches because that was expensive, so I bought this 8-port rack mount PoE injector, which caused a lot of controversy from people who didn't seem to understand that I don't have an infinite budget and I shouldn't just buy another PoE switch because that would cost more money. But Anyway, so I've been using this PoE injector to power devices, which has honestly been fine. This is from fs.com. And I've just been using the non-PoE switch. I really can't fault these. I've got all devices connected there. It's totally full, but if I did need more ports, I could unpatch devices. I've just got all the ports patched in, so I could take some out because I'm not using them all, of course. There's a couple of empty ports here, but that's because what I've got here is I've got one patch cable that goes from one port to another port bypassing the switch. I'm using this for an HDMI over Cat6 system, so these ports are just patched together for HDMI, so that's why they're not connected. And then over at the end here you can see I've got this SFP RJ45 module to connect up to the USG. That's just because I ran out of ports, and that's quite a good way to get you an extra port if you just want a copper port. So yeah, the switch has been really good. I've not got immediate plans to replace this, but I'm tempted at some point by their new switch, their 24 port Pro PoE switch, because that would give me PoE, so I could get rid of this injector, and then it means I could actually control PoE power to things like cameras to turn them off and stuff like that. And it's also got a 10 gigabit uplink, so I could uplink it at 10 gig. Now, unfortunately, Ubiquiti don't really have any 10 gig over copper options really. They've got one switch that does it, but it's only about 5 ports or something, and it's about £500-600 because it's got PoE and stuff. So if I get a new one, it'll still be gigabit with maybe 10 gig uplink, but it'll do so. I'm not having an immediate plan to replace this, but I might do it at some point. But yeah, the switch has been really good. Obviously, the only other thing with these switches is, again, they're layer 2 only. The new Pro switches have layer 3 capability, although I think it's a bit basic, but yeah, been very happy with the switches. Now here below the switch, we have the USG. So this is the UniFi Security Gateway Pro, and this is what I've been using as my router. And again, been really happy with it. There's been a couple of things I found where the firmware can't quite do it. You can't do certain things through the UniFi interface, but at least because this runs EdgeOS, you can go onto the controller and there's a file called config.gateway.json that you can put custom EdgeOS config in to set custom options. In particular on this, I've had to do one of those for my PPPoE connection, because my VDSL broadband connection uses PPPoE, and that means that you have each packet going out of the WAN interface is encapsulated in a PPPoE packet. What that means is that because there's that additional header data there for PPPoE, I think it's about 8 bytes, it means that you can't fit a full 1500 byte Ethernet packet in that payload, essentially. Now, you can get around that with things like MSS clamping, but my modem in ISP here supports a thing called baby jumbo frames, and what that means is you can configure the interface on your router to send out 1508 byte packets, which means there's that headroom for the PPPoE header already built into that, and it means you can send full 1500 byte frames. And annoyingly, you can't set that up through the USG's web interface. You have to do it through the config.gateway.json file. And I was hoping that, they might fix that in the future, but they don't seem to have it. It's still not an option, annoyingly. The other thing I found that's potentially a bit more annoying, because the first one's a bit of a niche use case, but this one should be quite a common use case, is there's no way to add static entries to the DNS resolver. Because it'd be really nice if I could go into this through the UniFi interface and add in custom DNS entries just for items I want to resolve DNS for in my flat on my local network. Because I don't want to necessarily have to deal with an external DNS server, especially if I'm an average person using this that doesn't have one. And it can be just nice, if you've got, like, for example, a smart device or a server at home or a NAS, you could add a static DNS entry. Again, you can do it through the config.gateway.json file, and I've done that, but I was really hoping they would move that into the controller interface, but they don't seem to have, unfortunately. But the USG seems really good. The performance has been really good. Obviously with this one, because it's an older model, you are limited by the total throughput for IDS and IPS, so like their intrusion detection and intrusion prevention. That limits it down to about 250 megabit, which it unfortunately seems to also do for LAN traffic. So if it only did that for WAN traffic, that would be fine because my connection is way less than 250 meg. But I found when I tried it, it seemed to also limit the throughput of inter-VLAN routing. So if I had 2 VLANs on my local network routing, they also went through that protection, and it totally not sort of bottlenecked the speed. So that's a little bit unfortunate. Now, what's really surprised me is they haven't actually updated the USG in a really long time. They've brought out the Dream Machine, but that's more of an all-in-one controller unit and a router. But they haven't really updated the USGs, which are the standalone routers that can work with external controllers. However, I've seen mention online of the UXG Pro, and it seems to be like a new UniFi security gateway they might be bringing out hopefully soon. That looks a bit similar to the UniFi Dream Machine, except for the fact it's not got it's not got the built-in switch or UniFi controller or anything like that, and it's got 10 gig. So that might be an interesting option just for people who are looking for something better than this, because at the moment, if you're buying a UniFi security gateway, you're still stuck with this model that I got 2 years ago, and it was even it'd been out a few years by the time I got it. But yeah, definitely very happy with the USG. There's just those few features that it just doesn't have through the web interface, which could be nice to have. But, you can set them manually through the config.gateway.json file if you have to. I suppose the only other thing to mention as well is that I've set up a VPN server on this so I can VPN in remotely, and that's performed totally fine. So it's a simple L2TP IPsec VPN with Radius. I get authentication, and then the Radius server just runs on this. And I've been using that to remote in to connect all my devices, and that's been brilliant, and the performance has been really good as well. So yeah, definitely very happy with that as well. Pretty sure I've even used it historically to route my to connect to the internet through my home broadband here. So if I've been on holiday and I've needed like a UK IP address to access something, I've actually routed all my internet traffic through the VPN running on this. So it comes out over my broadband, and it's been actually even fine doing that. So yeah, pretty happy. You just need to bear in mind what features it actually does have. So if you've got really advanced routing needs, you might need either something totally different to this, or potentially have some sort of router on the external side of this doing some certain more advanced stuff, and then that's then connected into this, and you just use this for your firewall and like LAN service type stuff. But yeah, the USG's been pretty good. Finally down here, we have the CloudKey Gen 2 Plus. And this is probably the one I've got the most, I've got a slight issue with it, and actually it's a very recent issue that I wouldn't have mentioned at all if you'd asked me this about, 3-4 months ago. The CloudKey Gen 2 Plus has worked brilliantly. It runs my UniFi controller and my UniFi Protect system, so this also deals with the cameras. As for the cameras, because they're not that exciting to really talk about, to dedicate a huge section of the video to, they've been fine. UniFi Protect's been pretty good. No problems at all with that, and the quality is really good. And I've been running this for a while, and I've been pretty happy with it. Now, one thing I have noticed with this, and I'll need to put additional footage in because you probably won't see it under these bright lights, is that the OLED has slightly degraded. There's like screen burn on it, because it just sits doing this sort of pattern, just cycling through it day after day after day, 24/7. It's been doing that for over 2 years now. And I noticed it before that when it would cycle between UniFi Protect and UniFi Network, where you'd have a symbol, for example, the UniFi access point or the camera, you would see a little bit of burn from the overlay of what used to be there. So you'd see a bit of burn of the camera on the access point and vice versa. And then I updated this to the latest firmware, and you can almost now see burn-in from where the old UI was, because the UI's changed slightly. So like the little globe here has like the top left-hand corner slightly darker, and the letters U and N on UniFi are a bit darker. And you can see, again, I'll need to put a different B-roll in, but you can see over the access point on the right-hand side, there's slight burn-in of a cloud shape that used to be there on the old UI. So, I mean, it's fine. It's not, it makes no difference to the functionality of it. But yeah, the OLED has degraded on this, which is a bit unfortunate. But other than that, it's been pretty good. It's run perfectly fine. I've never had this crash, and likewise, I forgot to say, but I've never had like the USG or any of this equipment go down or crash at all. It's been rock stable. But the difficulty I've had with this came in a recent update. And there's been a lot of shout about this online as well, so other people have had similar issues. But when I first set this up, I think it was version 0.0 or 0.8, I think. It was a really old firmware version, because this I'm pretty sure was even like a pre-release unit I got. And it was absolutely fine. But then a while back, because I was considering making changes to the network, I thought I'll update this, get everything fully updated. So I updated it to the latest version. And it was a fairly known change that they made, that with the latest version, you now have to sign into a UniFi account to log in, to use it. Now, I really don't like that, because to activate a new device, you have to have a UniFi account. And my fear with that is what happens in, say, 5 years' time. If UniFi then say, oh, we're not supporting this device anymore, and then they say change their API, so it requires a different API call to do the authentication, and they're no longer releasing firmware for this, does that then mean that the login process on this will no longer work if they've changed their API? And that could then mean that I've got a device here that used to work totally standalone, that if I ever factory reset it, I might not be able to set it up again if the authentication doesn't work. Now, UniFi does have pretty good support life cycles. I mean, they've only just deprecated their first access points recently, and that they are ancient. So I'm sure we're okay, but it is just a bit annoying. The big issue, and with that update, another good thing they did actually was they kind of, I can't even say it, they unified, they unified a lot of the sort of applications on it. Because this used to very much be, you had a central a sort of web page that loaded up that showed like, welcome to the CloudKey. Then you had a button for UniFi Network, which is the UniFi controller stuff, and a button for UniFi Protect. Clicking those loaded up each application, but it just loaded each one on a different HTTP port, and then that application asked you to log into it. So it was essentially just a single machine that ran two applications with a web interface that linked you to them both. With the new update, it's much nicer in that you get a central login page, and then you can click UniFi Protect or UniFi Network. It takes you into that, you've got the same user on both. It's just it's very easy to switch between the two, it's a lot slicker, and I really like that. However, there's one problem I found that I actually only noticed a while after. Because while yes, they've centralised all those applications into a nice interface, what they've also done is they've centralised the option for enabling remote management. And that's a big problem. Now, I really do not like the idea of having my network remotely manageable from a cloud login page. I really hate that. I don't understand the reason for it in a lot of situations. I would much rather VPN in home. I don't like the idea of having a remote cloud service that could be compromised, like UniFi's one recently was, and could cause someone to get into my network and reconfigure a firewall, for example. And that's bad enough in a home environment. In like a business environment, that's even more scary. However, for UniFi Protect for the camera access and the CCTV system, I don't mind it as much, because if I'm out, for example, and I get a notification that my alarm's gone off, I want to very quickly grab my phone, open the app, and view the cameras without having to connect a VPN and stuff like that. Now, I wouldn't mind not having remote access enabled, but additionally with the UniFi Protect mobile app, it requires you to have cloud access enabled for the mobile app to work. You cannot add a controller based on its local IP address. And that was a complaint I had when I first tried all this out, and they still haven't fixed it yet. There keeps being bits of chat about how they're working on it, but they've never done it yet, so we'll see if they ever do. But in order to use the UniFi Protect app on my phone, I need to have cloud access enabled for UniFi Protect. Now, that used to be totally fine, because what you could do is that you could, because the applications were separate, you could enable cloud access on remote cloud access on UniFi Protect and disable it on UniFi Network. And that's what I had for years, and it was great. But when I did this recent update, I just did the update, logged into my UniFi account, went fine, and I just totally forgot about it. And then one day I was in here and I just happened to glance at the CloudKey, and I saw it doing its scrolling thing, and it got to this UniFi Network screen, and I saw this little cloud symbol wasn't crossed out and was showing a cloud. Whereas it used to be crossed out on the UniFi Network screen and not crossed out on the UniFi Protect screen. And what seemed to happen is with that update, it enabled cloud access for both UniFi Protect and UniFi Network. Now, I may be being an idiot and may have just not seen the option when it came up telling me it was going to do it, so I might have just not noticed it, but it definitely wasn't very clear it was enabling that. And sure enough, I ran to my laptop, opened it up, logged into the UniFi Cloud portal. Sure enough, I got into my network management. So that was terrifying. So I've had to disable it. But the problem is now that the remote access, so the switch to switch that on and off, is global to the device, not the application. So now, because I'm running my controller and UniFi Protect on the same unit, I now have to either have both of those enabled for remote access, or neither. And if I say neither, then I can't use the UniFi Protect mobile app. So that's really annoying. I've turned off cloud access at the moment because I'm not happy having it on for my network management, but that is really annoying. So that's definitely a big complaint, and it's just kind of concerning that they've gone that direction, to take a device that used to work without an account, enforce it to use an account, and then now they've changed it so the remote access is required for UniFi Network if you want it for UniFi Protect as well. Now, if they ever fix that UniFi Protect app, I won't mind as much, because at least with that, I'll be able to connect over the controller's local IP, leave remote access totally disabled, and then I can just connect to a VPN to view my cameras, and that would be fine. But yeah, that's definitely a bit of a complaint with this. However, apart from that stupid change decision they've made, I really can't fault this. Previously, I've always just run UniFi controllers on servers, but having a very set and forget solution that I can update with the click of a button is really nice. So yeah, apart from that change in the firmware, which is definitely not for the best in my opinion, I've been pretty happy with the CloudKey. Now obviously I've still just got it sitting on the shelf here. You can get the rack mount, it's about £100, which isn't super cheap. But we'll see. I might get it. I'll keep an eye out on eBay, and if I can find one cheap enough second hand, I'll maybe buy a rack mount kit for this. Which, I don't know how that would help the screen burn, because it would turn the screen upside down because it's mounted in the other way. But yeah. The CloudKey's been really good, except for the fact that the OLED seems to have got a bit burning over the years, and yeah, that firmware change forcing you to have remote access enabled for all applications on the device, rather than it being per application, is pretty annoying. So that was a look at the hardware, and yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. There's still a few bits where there's certain features missing, as I was mentioning the USG, and that move with the CloudKey is really annoying because I don't like the idea of having to log into a UniFi account. So hopefully it's just a thing they've changed on the CloudKey, and they're not moving that model going forward with everything. Namely the self-hosted controller, if you want to host that yourself. I really hope they don't move that to require a UniFi account to set it up, because at least you've currently got that as an option, that if you don't want a UniFi account, you refuse to have one, you could still host the controller yourself on a server or a Raspberry Pi or a cloud server, and you could still use it that way with an account. So I hope they don't go down that route and move everything to it. But apart from that, I've been pretty happy. And definitely having that central management's great. Especially because this is my home network, I don't want to muck around logging into switches and remembering CLIs for different types of switches I've got to set up VLANs and stuff. Being able to just do it on UniFi is so good, because I can quickly, if I want to plug a device into a port and set the VLAN up on it, I can just log into a single interface, even using the app on my phone, pick the port, pick a port profile, and that port profile can have quite complicated VLAN config, and it'll just apply all of that to that single port. And it's been really, really good for that. The only thing I've found that is more of a psychological thing I've found is that with UniFi, you don't get any sort of vendor lock-in. You know, it's all standardized. If I want to use another switch, a third-party switch from any brand, it'll use the exact same VLANs that these use, so I can just plug it in, set the VLANs up manually, and as long as I match them to what's set up in UniFi, it'll work perfectly fine. So you're totally not tied into using UniFi equipment. Likewise, if I decided I didn't want to use this USG anymore, I could rip it out, put any other router in there, set the router up manually, and sure, it wouldn't work through the UniFi management interface, but it would still work totally fine with the switching and the access points and stuff like that. I think even the cameras, you can get video feeds out for different NVR software, but don't quote me on that, I've not tried it. However, I find there's like a psychological lock-in, because it's so nice having everything through that centralized interface, that if I'm buying another switch or another bit of networking hardware, I kind of want it to be unified just so it integrates. A recent example was I've not bought it yet, but I'm doing a project where I've got a single port, and I might need a couple of PoE ports out of it. And I was looking at getting a switch where I could like put PoE in to power the switch and have it have multiple PoE powered outputs. Now that switch doesn't really need to be managed, doesn't need it to be remotely complex at all, as long as it satisfies that PoE requirement. But I feel a strong urge to get a UniFi one just because it'll show in the dashboard and give me all the nice graphs. But of course that means it costs a lot more, because the UniFi one's the UniFi Switch Flex, I think, which cost about £100. Whereas there's a lot of cheaper options from other brands that just wouldn't integrate with UniFi. So that's the only thing I've found, is there's that psychological lock-in, where if I want to buy a bit of equipment, I feel this urge to get the UniFi one. Likewise, I wouldn't be totally against the idea of having some level of 10 gig. Namely, just in my office, if I ever built a new server that was more powerful where 10 gig would be useful, I could just have a 10 gig switch in my rack that connects to the server and connects to my laptop docking station, and that's maybe my desktop, and then those few devices would need to be 10 gig. The urge there is then to get a UniFi switch, but they don't really do many 10 gig options, especially if you want 10 gig over copper, as I mentioned earlier. You need that £500 odd switch, but there's really cheap options from brands like Microtech. But because that wouldn't integrate with the UniFi controller, I almost don't want that. That just feels like I would be missing out on the UniFi interface. So I suppose that psychological lock-in is almost a good sign, that it shows that UniFi is really good because I want it. But it is something to bear in mind, it's a little bit annoying. But maybe that's just me. But yeah, there you go. That's a look at my network after 2 years of it being full UniFi, and maybe just over 3 years since I put it all in. And yeah, apart from a few gripes I've had with some of the changes Ubiquiti's made to the sort of setup and login process on the CloudKey, I'm pretty happy with it. So this probably not been the most exciting video ever, just because I'm not really changing anything or doing anything, I'm just talking about the stuff I've already got. But hopefully people have found that a little bit interesting, just to get a bit of an update after a while, just to talk about how I found all this. And stand by for a future video, a couple of videos time, where I do this slight upgrade to the network, so that'll be quite good too. So yeah, thank you very much for watching.